anymore, but elected to the bishop of the Central Southern Illinois Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So today we bring the voice from this religious professional, wondering about how do these two coexist and what can one learn from the other. What we know about Bishop Roth is that he, before he was elected bishop, was pastor at Faith Lutheran Church in Jacksonville, Illinois for 23 years. Earlier he served as assistant pastor at Grace Lutheran in Glen Ellen in Illinois. Bishop John academic degrees include an MDiv from Christ Seminary, Seminec, an Master's of Theology from the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and a PhD in New Testament studies from Vanderbilt University. He also studied at the University of Tübingen, Germany. Welcome to my tongue here. He and his wife have been married for 30 years, and they're parents of Maria and Laura and Sam, and as of this summer, they also both having a son-in-law, Drew. So anyway, we are honored to have you with us, and I hope your mind doesn't crackle like mine did. So
I'll tell you what I'm going to. I turned this on and I didn't get anything before. Does this make any difference? No. It does help? It doesn't help. I'll tell you, I'd rather not have the buzz.
All right, I'll turn it off. If Mohammed won't nut,
I'll just come to you. Like,
sounds good.
Can you still see me well enough and all of that? Okay. Well, I thank you, Pastor Elaine, and I'm happy to be here. But it's interesting because just yesterday, as I'm getting ready to come here and kind of do this lecture type thing, a friend of mine sends me a link to a blog that makes the case that nobody learns like this anymore. So I thought, well, there goes that. But well, this is the way it's going to be today. I've got some thoughts, and then I hope that we'll have some time to dialogue after it. Truth be told, I have no idea how long this is going to take because I didn't practice it. So, oh, you've got a clock. All right. Hey, do you know what it means when a pastor takes off his watch and sets it on the pulpit? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's right. That's right. Well, many Christians feel under attack. They say that secular influences dominate the national media, politics, and local schools, and public morality. That society is becoming skeptical and relativist. Religious belief is stigmatized. And scientific disciplines are dominated by those who claim that science rules God out of existence. At the same time, non-religious people feel under attack. They say that fundamentalism, fundamentalistic religiousness, is growing rapidly. Christians are stifling scientific education, and non-belief is stigmatized. Which is it? Which is it? Is faith being marginalized by science, or is science being stifled by faith? Well, perhaps the answer is that both are true, at least partially. But that isn't the whole premise of this lecture series to say that to say one must choose between faith or science is a false dilemma. Isn't that the premise of this lecture series? Okay. There is a long tradition within Christian theology, within Christianity, of Christian theology being in dialogue with intellectual resources outside of Christian tradition, and then drawing on those intellectual resources as a means of developing a religious or a theological vision. Dialogue with Platonism, Plato, Platonism, was immensely important during the first 5 centuries of the Christian church, especially in the Greek-speaking world and in the Eastern Mediterranean. Even then, in the first 5 centuries of the church, engagement with a worldview such as Platonism, a pervasive worldview, and in a context that was predominantly not Christian, that was both an opportunity and a challenge for Christians. Christian thinkers such as Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria wrestled with how to make use of the intellectual resources of Platonism, how to use that and think through it, visualizing how a Christian worldview works within that construct, without at the same time compromising the integrity of Christianity itself. A new discussion opened up in the 13th century with the rediscovery of Aristotle by medieval theologians, Thomas Aquinas in particular. Engagement with Aristotelian ideas offered stimulation for intellectual cross-fertilization in a variety of areas, philosophy, ethics, and here's where we begin really to get closely connected with science, physics. Who's the physicist? Physics. Well, critics of religion are quick to point to times in the church's history when the church has stifled scientific inquiry. And to be sure, there are sad examples of that, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. However, the fact is that religion and science have a long, productive history in Western civilization. For example, and I just trekked these out just to try to give you, you don't have to remember any of the names of any of this, but just to give you a sense of how pervasive this actual dialogue and interaction has been in the history of the church. Francis Bacon, generally regarded as the father of modern science, taught that God provided us with 2 books, the book of nature and the book of Scripture, and one must study both. Towering figures in the history of science believed in God and considered their faith to be entirely compatible with science. Galileo, whom I'll mention again later, Johannes Kepler, Blaise Pascal, Louis Pasteur, to name a few. And you don't have to go to the distant past for scientists who are people of faith. For example, the latest book by the renowned genome research scientist, Francis Collins. Name familiar to any? Francis Collins? Currently director of the National Institute of Health, formerly the director of the National Human Genome Research Institute. Remember the Human Genome Project and those things? Okay. His latest book, co-written with Carl Giberson, is entitled The Language of Science and Faith, Straight Answers to Genuine Questions, published last year. This long history of people of faith as leaders in secular academic fields, including the natural sciences, should give us encouragement for the dialogue now. Okay, now if you're following my outline, and I wondered if I changed something, but I don't think I did. Now I'm going to go to the section in the outline that is the tension. That being said, this history of the sense that these were together and partners and work and in dialogue. That being said, let's explore the tension that has developed between faith and science. I do hope that you grant what I've said, that for the better part of 1,600 years, science and theology were thought to be partners. Major scientific advances within Western civilization were made by people of faith. Some of those leading scientists were actually priests as well as scientists, passionately pursuing both religious truth and scientific truth, because they considered them to be fundamentally parts of one whole truth together. Scientific discoveries were insights into the marvelous working of God's creation. Okay, but then came the church's reaction to Galileo. And this story is famous. The dominant worldview of the time of Galileo was that the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun revolves around the earth. Galileo, following Copernicus, began to publish that no, maybe the sun isn't the center of the universe, but rather, maybe the earth isn't the center of the universe, but the sun is, and the earth revolves around the sun. Okay. Galileo was denounced by virtually everybody, not just by the church. Most scientists of Galileo's day said Galileo was wrong. Okay, you got to keep that in mind. Remember the context. In addition to being contrary to the wisdom of the day, however, from the church perspective, Galileo's views were considered to be contrary to Scripture, to the Bible. The Bible speaks of the sun rising and setting. For example, Genesis chapter 15, verse 12, as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. And if you go through, you can find lots of places like that in the Bible. Plus, then you've got the other famous one, Joshua's command that the sun stand still. And of course, it assumes that the sun moves across the sky, and if you command the sun to stand still, then it must mean that the earth is stationary and the sun is moving, and et cetera, et cetera. And these Christians then reasoned that if Galileo was correct, the Scriptures would be wrong, and the Scriptures cannot be wrong. Charges were brought against Galileo, and eventually he was taken before the Grand Inquisition of the Church, June 22nd, 1633. Grand Inquisitors passed sentence. Galileo was guilty of the heresy, quote, of having believed and held the doctrine, which is false and contrary to the holy and divine Scriptures, that the sun is the center of the universe, and that it does not move from east to west, and that the earth does move and is not the center of the world. Okay, close quote. The story is said that when Galileo knelt down and, gave his, he recanted and gave his apology and that sort of thing, that when he was still kneeling down, he finished all of that and said, but it still moves. Well, this was not the church at its best. And it appears to have set the stage for a conflict between religion and science ever since. This Galileo story is sort of the proof, it's the classic proof, if you will, that the church is opposed to true science, and that Christians want to tell scientists what they can and cannot teach based on what Christians see in the Bible. This is the classic illustration that is brought out. Okay. Of all of the mistakes that the Grand Inquisitors made with Galileo, let me suggest that the crucial mistake was not that they misread the stars and the planets. As I said, virtually everybody did. Most scientists, most astronomers disagreed with Galileo at this point in time. But the crucial mistake was that the Inquisition misread the Bible. And that's a mistake that haunts the relationship between Christianity and science to this day. Now, Christians don't have grand inquisitions anymore, and Christians can't, to my knowledge anyway, can't jail or execute heretics. But the church still can and sometimes does push thinking people away from Christ by insisting that the Bible intends to teach science where the Bible itself does not intend to teach science. And that's a terrible shame, because we lose thinking people who get the impression from this that science and Christian faith are incompatible. Now, I can come back to, the topic tonight is not biblical interpretation. I got my degree in biblical interpretation. I'm happy to talk to you about biblical interpretation anytime. But that's not the topic for tonight. If you want to come back to that sometime, I'd be happy to. Now, I simply want us to appreciate why some people in science take a dim view of religious faith. We on the Christian side of the faith and science debate bear a share of responsibility for the tension between science and religion. At the same time, however, those who speak for the science side of the debate also bear a share of the responsibility. Science is the study of observable facts, phenomena, and proximate causes. Science forms hypotheses that can be tested and verified by observation, experimentation, and analysis. Science describes the physical properties of things and tells us how they work. It unlocks potential new uses of elements of our world. That's what you're studying now, potential new uses of elements of our world. And this is, of course, valuable knowledge. In the course of their methodical observation, experimentation, and analysis, scientists emphasize that the scientific method excludes God as a factor in its experiments and theories. Properly understood, this is an honest statement about the limits of science. It's not a statement about the superiority of science over religion. It's a recognition that there are limits to what can be concluded on the basis of scientific method. It's an acknowledgement that ultimate conclusions about God and God's involvement or lack of involvement or God's existence at all, those questions are outside of science's realm, beyond science's ability to reach. We must resist what physicist John Polkinghorne labels, quote, and this is a quote from a world-renowned physicist, quark theory, or it's not theory anyway, okay. We have to resist, he says, the thinking that resist a narrow and unsatisfactory identification of the reasonable with what is thinkable within the limited protocols of scientific argument. Should I say that again? Did you catch that? Or you got it on tape. It means we must resist, quote, a narrow and unsatisfactory identification of the reasonable with what is thinkable within the limited protocols of scientific argument. I'll make a text available to you. But you never want to hand these things out, because I may take off on a tangent somewhere or skip. I already skipped a big section, I will tell you that. But anyway, okay. This means, for example, that there is a world of difference between saying God is not a factor in the origin of the universe and saying God is not a factor that can be tested. Those are two very different statements. The statement God is not a factor in the origin of the universe that can be tested is fair from a scientific point of view. The statement, God is not a factor in the origin of the universe, is not, strictly speaking, a scientific assertion because it cannot be observed and tested. Are you with me? Okay. All right, now to an example of how a change in a scientific paradigm changed the dialogue between faith and science. And I bring this up because it really is a dialogue. What happens in science makes a difference in how we talk about faith and the reality of us in God's world. All right. What does science teach us about the history of our universe? About 100 years ago, the consensus view of scientists was that the universe exists in a steady state. Steady state. That is, the universe always was as it is and always will be as it is. That is, the universe, it's infinite, the universe is infinite in time, infinite in